one that knows.
Yeah. If the application grows a bit, you'll find that you'll have to drill and drill and drill from maybe
Yeah.
a child to like a great grandchild. So to
Yes.
solve that, if you don't want to use any external tool, you can use the context API.
Okay.
So it's an inbuilt API to React, and like its purpose is to make it possible to share data regardless of where any component is located. So as long as they have just the same provider, like the same context provider, they can consume the same data
Yeah,
without having to pass props.
I've tried use context.
Yeah. And then now it's a bit bigger now we're talking big applications. Now you can reach out to something like now Redux Toolkit. Redux actually is very good for global state management for very big applications. But there are many other tools, like many like smaller state management libraries that you can also reach out for, like Zoostand, Jotai. But me, basically, if I'm not writing Redux and it's context, I don't like. Yeah, but you have a few options there. Redux for very big applications, Redux Toolkit specifically. And then now, yeah, context API. Context is very powerful. Actually, something like you'll find that Redux itself is implemented using context. So it's super powerful. So yeah, you can avoid prop drilling using that also.
Okay, thank you. I think now I have a better picture.
Yeah,
So to avoid prop dealing, I'll just go to use context unless I'm creating something extra.
extra large.
Yeah. Sawa. Thank you.
All right, so I think we'll talk about your story afterwards because I'm also not really sure what it means. I think I know what it means, but because I think I asked someone else sometime like 2 or 3 weeks ago in a certain application I was building, and I was like, "Am I doing prop drilling?" She was like, "No, that's not what prop drilling is." So I'll circle back to that afterwards. All right, so today we will look at a few frameworks. So we look at Vue and React. And the reason we are doing it is we also want to show you that up to this point, whatever we've learned, the knowledge that we already have is enough even to start jumping into those frameworks. Because we've done most of the basics. Like we've covered, I think, like 80% of what you actually need to start working with frameworks. So I think I'll start. I was supposed to do VueJS. Is it Evans? I think it's Evans, but he hasn't joined, so probably atajoin baadaye. Who was it? Just a minute. It's Evans. Okay, when he joins, he will. I guess he will take us through it. But so I'll start. So initially, the idea was to just do like a simple hello world, but we had a discussion with Joseph. Tukaona it's better if we try to do something a bit more, not really complicated, very simple, a very simple application that will just show the two different libraries and how they work and their similarities as well. And then you guys can make up your mind as to which one is not really easy, but okay, maybe easy for a beginner. And then you can just give your thoughts afterwards. So I'll start. So I will start. So I'll start sharing my screen. I was actually in the process of finishing up the project just now. So I will show you two ways of doing it. You guys will tell me when you can see my screen. We'll also look at documentation here, Vue as we cover it. Okay, you can see my screen.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so let me first of all show you what I have. Okay, so now what the application actually is. So I will do an else start the server. Okay, so now when I click on this button, purchase a new user, and then it also changes the styling. So you can see when the border is currently this bluish color, and the button is also has a blue background. When I click on it, changes. So anytime we have a lady as the person that was fetched, it changes the border color as well as the button. As you can see. Okay, so that's what is currently there. Now, before I even go into the code, I will go to Vue's documentation. I will go into Vue's documentation. I will open it up. So it's the progressive framework, an approachable, performant, versatile framework for building web user interfaces. Then we will go into get started. Then we'll start off. Right, so I've been using Vue for I think around 1.5 years now. It's not that it was just more easy for me, at least for me, it was easier to consume Vue as opposed to React, because I tried React and it was just giving me all sorts of issues. So I decided to first of all try Vue, and then if I needed to learn React, I would do it afterwards. That's what has happened. And the funny thing is, my knowledge in Vue has helped me to learn React way quicker, much faster. So this is just like a very small example. So already, even if you do not have any knowledge of Vue, just because of what you've been doing this past week, this code should look familiar. This is what Joseph covered, right? In your code, Joseph alikuwa na cover ni jana. Yeah, it's yesterday. So I am importing the create app, right? This function from Vue. Then I can pass in the data, and then I can mount the application. Now I will go through the code in my own code sasa. Okay, so now let's go back to this. Now I just have a very simple HTML file here with a div with an ID of app. Then I have an image. Now this full colon that you see here, these two dots, this full colon, it simply means I want my source. So this source attribute should be able to accept variables. That's what I'm telling it. I'm simply telling it this value that comes here as a picture is a variable. Treat it as a JavaScript. So you can actually write code here by a JS. So I'm simply telling it this value that is here is something that you should get from JS as a variable called picture. Same with the alt. Anytime you see the full colon, I'm simply binding this attribute to a value in JavaScript. Same with the class. I am simply binding the class, because this is just a normal class attribute, but now I've transformed it and I'm telling it, get the value of the class for this particular image from a variable called gender. Now, if I now want to pass in values, so variables, I use what is called, you can call them like double mustache, easy curly braces, Billy, like a pair on each side, hapa na hapa. So first name, that's why we can see Ellen, and then last name, Aho. So now if I come and remove, nikitoa tu hii, if I remove this, just have Jane now. It's done a refresh, and we now just have Jane. I put it back, I now have Jane Doe. Then I can simply click on it, change the value, click on it, change the value, click on it, change the value. Same with email. I'm simply giving it an email, then taking the value from JS, right? and then I have a button. The button is also taking the class as a variable. Anytime you see the full colon, simply means this is a variable. So this gender class exists in my CSS. If you look into my CSS, this is just a normal CSS file. You can see I should have gender somewhere here. Right, so what is actually happening, I'll show you what it's doing, because it's actually doing it within the within the script, within the JS file. So what it's doing, right, when the gender is male, so when I fetch the data from that API and the gender is male, it simply puts this class, this male class, as the value. So when the gender is male, right, when the gender is male after the API call, this value is changed to male. I will show you what it's actually doing. And then the click. So when I click the button, I don't need this anymore. Okay, this is an older implementation, so I think I'm getting a very old version of it. So initially, before these newer versions of VueJS, the way you would handle clicks is v on, so on click, then you call the function get user. So that's why when I click on it, it's working. I will show you a newer syntax to do it. Okay, so now that's that. So it means we have a function called get user somewhere. Right, so now hapa chini, right here on line 17, I have a script that is calling the view. So I'd simply have a link to view, the VueJS library. So now this gives me access to everything within Vue. And then I have my app.js here. Now let's check that file, app.js. So you can see, let me remove his is equal to you. So the first thing I need to do, because this view, I have not defined this view anywhere in my app.js. I'm not importing view from anywhere. That's because it's coming from this link. That's why I have access to view. And then I'm telling view, create an app, create a new app. So again, that's, you can see, it's a method on the view object. And then it takes in an object. So the create app method takes in an object. And that object takes in a data property. So this data property is the values that we want. What variables do we want to use in our application? So this is now a data function. It returns an object that has first name, last name, gender, email, and picture. Then I have a methods object. So any methods that I'm going to use in the application. So I have a get user method, and then I'm using fetch the information from this API. And then I destructure the results, get results. And then I simply use those results to populate these values here. Because now what I'm doing is, when I get a response, so when I click on this button, right, I simply change the value of this first name to whatever comes back from results, right? The item at index 0, I get the name and the first. Same thing with the last name, same thing with gender, with email, and with picture. So now when I do click on this button, it simply changes these values here in this object. And because in our markup, right, we've told the markup that these values that you get huku are dynamic. So get them from the JavaScript. So it means every time the value of picture changes hapa, it also updates huku kwa the image. Now the gender, by default, the gender is male, right? But when we change the value, so every time you click, the gender changes from male to female, male to female. So again, for the class, when we change from male to female, this value changes from male to female. So if you are male, it takes the class that has male. If you are female, it takes the class that has female. And then the last thing is you mount the application. Where do you want to mount the application? In our div. In our div that has an ID of app. This thing here. That is one way of doing VueJS. But this is not how we normally write it. I just wanted to show you this so that now when we get into how to do it using like a build tool, like Vue, I can now walk you through the code, and then you can see the similarities. You can see why we need a div app, and then what is this? What do you mean when we say app.mount? Because you will see the same syntax when you use a build tool. Any questions? Anyone with a question? Is there something that doesn't make sense? I don't think there's anything new here. Hapa kila kitu we've already. So if you don't, without looking at the view, this thing here, everything else is familiar. Even the view, we know that this is an object based off of what we've done. And we know that we have a create app method on that object. We know this is a data function that's returning an object, right? We know this is a methods object. We know this is another function, an async function. We are simply awaiting the results. And then when we get the results, we simply change the values of this object. Anybody with a question? Okay. All right. All right, so this is like one way of doing it. If you're just trying out Vue and you don't want to go through the whole Vite process, you can do this and just play around with the library. Okay, all right. So now let's look at how you do it with a different way. So I'll simply come here. I will open folder. I will open. Tutorial. Okay, so we have it there. Okay, so now we have seen how you can do it with just normal like HTML, and then you just have a CDN that links to Vue. So now let's look at how you can do it using a build tool like Vite. So I will use, I think I use npm create Vite at test. Wait, I forgot to give it a file. So you can see it's asking me what I want to use. Use vanilla, Vue, React. This is what Joseph was doing yesterday. So we can use Vue. We can use Vue with TypeScript. Someone has a question? Okay. So we can use Vue with TypeScript. You can also use Next. So Next is Vue library, like Next. It's like Next, but now for Vue. I know those names are very confusing. So I will now select TypeScript, even though we have not touched TypeScript. I will select TypeScript. Okay. Now I will now install my dependencies, anything that I need for Vue, anything that should come with the library. So let me see, was someone saying something in the chat? Okay, all right, I'll zoom in. Better? I guess it's a bit better. So you can see when you just do that, right? You can see we already have some files here. We have package.json, we have a README, we have the vite config file, we have the TypeScript config file, we have a public folder, we have a VS Code file folder, and the source. Okay, so you can see my app should live here, but I need I don't have a node modules. So the node modules is where I will get all my modules. That's where Vue will live, and any other dependencies that I need. So if you open this up, you should see my dependencies is just Vue, and then my dev dependencies, it's VueJS, the plugin, TypeScript, Vite, and Vue and TypeScript. Okay, so now I will simply install install the dependencies. Control PNPM.
Ian,
Okay. Mm-hmm.
As you do that, why are you using PNPM and what is it? I am familiar with NPM.
It's faster. In my experience, it finishes the process of downloading your packages faster, and also the caching. Cache is better than NPM. I think even better than Yarn. You can see it's already done. Shamaliza. So what it does, it will cache your requests to NPM. And then if it doesn't need to go and download all of them again, it will not do that. So you can see Upper, it's telling me resolved 72, and it's been able to reuse 50 of them. So basically, it's better to use. It's easier in terms of downloading packages. So they are slightly different, but PNPM is like a superior version of NPM. It's just a bit better at caching your requests to NPM. I think they use almost the same technology in Yarn.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but the commands are the same. They are exactly the same. If you normally do npm install, it's pnpm install. If you normally do npm run dev, npm run dev.
So I can use it anywhere I normally use NPM.
But you need to first of all install it.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
You set the npm install.
Okay, I will visit their documentation. Thank you.
And visit the documentation. So now we have all the packages have been downloaded. So now let's start the application. If we go into package.json, you can see we have scripts here. We have scripts for starting the dev server. So in development mode, we want to start the server. In dev mode, we run in npm because I'm using pnpm, run dev. Then now that will start our development server. It will run Vite. If you want to build your application, if you're done working on your application, you now want to build it for production, then you run in pnpm, run build. If you want to preview your application, same thing. You run the preview. So we need to run pnpm run dev for it to start our development server. So pnpm run dev. At Vite, it has started. Shamaliza. Now, if I go into this same thing, simply want localhost. Why is it not finishing it for me? So there we go. So we have this is what you get with Vite immediately. So this gives you can go to Vite, look at the documentation, go to Vue, look at the documentation. And this is like a classic example of how most frameworks will, this is the starter for most frameworks. There's normally a counter. They try to show you how to use state or how to manage state or how to manipulate state. So same thing with Vue. So now they're telling us, if you want to edit this file, we need to go into components, into the hello world.vue. Okay, so HMR means hot module reload. So that simply means when you change your file, it reloads. So app.vue. So before we even go into app.vue, I want us to go into, should have a main.ts. Now, remember our initial example, the one that I showed you before. We had a view.createApp. Do you remember? In pale chini kwa app.js, we had a view. We were setting, we were declaring a variable called app, then setting the value of that to view.createApp. Right? Now here, we are simply getting the create app from Vue, and Vue is coming from the node modules. So if you've ever done Kamoshe Guza Node.js, when you have your packages within node modules, you don't need to have a path for it. You don't need to say dot something. No, iko hapa kwa node module. So you just say, just give it the name of the package. So Vue is iko hapa ndani. It's one of the modules, one of the packages here. So that's why we have access to create app, because Vue is a file, a JS file that has is exporting a function called create app. That's why you have access to it. We are destructuring. Again, these are all things we've been doing this past week. And then I am simply importing the styles. So these are the styles that I want to be applied globally to the whole application. So I'm using it here. This is my main entry file. And then I'm importing app. So app is the application I want to render. If I go into index.html, you can see, again, very similar language, very similar syntax. We had a div with an app, even in the other one. But in that case, our code was ilikuwa hapa ndani, sindio? It was here. And then I had a script to the CDN, and then I had a script to my own JS file. But this time, right, I have a create app, which takes in an app. This app, right, this app is here, iko hapa ndani, and I'll show you what it does. But the dot mount is the same. So we are simply telling Vue where we should mount our application. We are telling it mount the application, right? Put the HTML, the one that we get from Vue, hapa ndani, within this div. That's what we're telling it. So any code that we get, weka hapa ndani ya hii div. That's what we are doing. So you can see the syntax is a bit different, but there it's very similar to the other one. It's just that now we are using a build tool and we are using Vite. Okay, so if I go into the styles.css, it's just a normal CSS file. There's nothing new here. It's just a CSS file that is setting everything, the background, the colors for the button. Okay, so let's go into app.vue. Now, we have things called components. So when you think about your application, you can think about your application in bits. You can segment your application into multiple chunks. So for example, this VS Code, we can think about VS Code in components. We can think, for example, that this navigation bar is one component, this side menu is another component, and then this whole section is another component. And then you bring them all together in one parent component. It will render your whole application as if it's one thing. But in true sense, it's piece by piece. You take one piece, you put it on another piece. And then you render them all within one parent. So now here what we are doing is we are importing a hello world. So Vue has something called SFC, single file components. That simply means, right, your SFC contains your HTML, your JavaScript, and your CSS. You've literally combined all of those three things and put them in one thing, in one file. And they have an extension of .vue. So app.vue. You can see I have my styles here as well directly. So I can code everything in one file. And then I have my template. So my template is where I will put my markup, my HTML. And then I have my script where I put my JavaScript. And then with Vue, anytime you're using TypeScript, you need to tell it language TypeScript. And then this setup is a new API called the composition API. There's not hakuna haja ya kwenda into detail as to what it does because it's like the default nowadays. So now if you want to import anything, if you want to import a component, right, I can simply import it within the script file because the script hapa ndani consumes JavaScript. You can write JavaScript hapa ndani. We are importing a hello world from my components. I have a folder called components. And then within components, I have a hello world.vue. And then I simply have my code. So this hello world takes in a property. It consumes something. We need to pass down some property for it, but we'll look at that later. So don't really worry about this right now. Just know if you want to import anything, you have to import it within the script tags. And then you have your template. Now, upper, you can now write your HTML. That's the normal way you do it. It will work. Now, let's go into hello world because anytime you click on this, you're changing the value. You're changing the state. Right? So let's go and find out where this value is, this count, because it's not here. We cannot see that in our markup. So it has to mean it has to be in our components, in our hello world. And it is here. So I will just make it a bit bigger. Should I zoom in a bit ama mnaona vizuri? Can you see my screen properly?
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay. So, okay. All right, so let's go back to that application. Okay. All right, so now this is simply, I will talk about this later, but just for now, just know that I am passing a prop. I'm just simply giving the property a type because I'm using TypeScript. So I'm telling it whatever prop you get has to be a string. That's what I'm doing here, basically. This is TypeScript. So if I go down, you can see right here, upper on line 6, I'm creating a variable called count. So JavaScript, not JavaScript, Vue gives us a ref method or a ref function, a reference. So basically we want to store, right, a new variable and then you set it to 0. So this is like setting state. I am setting a new count state and then I'm using the ref method to set the initial state to 0. If I change this to 8, it's already reloaded the application. I go back into the application. You can see it's now 8. It's now 8. Let me split the screens again. No, this is not the file I wanted. This is the completed version. It's not what I want. Just give me a minute. I'll sort it out. This is what I want. This is what we've started on. So I've changed the initial state to now 8. We now have 8. I will also zoom in here. I've changed the state to 8. If I now come and change the state to now 10, we now have 10. And it's reactive. Like if it's reactive, if I click on it, it's changing now. And the way you're changing it is very simple. So all this other code is very similar to the other component. We simply have a script. Anywhere we want to use our JS, we have our script, and then you put everything within the script. And then now if you want to use any of those, for example, the message prop, I simply come down here and I simply say h1 and then message. So this prop is being passed down from app.view. If you go to where we are using hello world, you can see right here, we are passing down message to hello world, and the message is vit plus view. I can change this to something else. You can see it's now hello. So I'm passing down that prop to my hello world component, and then I'm rendering it here as a h1 just by doing this. I simply put in the double mustaches, the same way we saw in the other one. So anytime you want to include variables or JS, or you want to have JS in your markup, in your HTML, you simply have the double mustaches. And then we simply have a card with a class of card, and then we have a button that has an @click. Remember the other one was V and then on click. But now with the newer syntax, it's simply @click. Then we simply get the value, which is count, and we simply add it, ++. Now that works. If I was to simply copy paste this, if I was to take this, right, make a hapa, now have to, but I want this one to minus. So the state is shared. Now it's going backwards. That easy. You can see it's persisting. Anybody with a question? Is there something that has confused you? Especially if you're coming from, if you don't like React or anything. That point, I will remove all this code.
For a clarification, so ref is ref equivalent to state?
It is.
React.
It is. It is. It's what you use to set your initial state, but there's a caveat. But I will, because there's two ways to declare initial state in Vue. You can either use ref, or you can use something called reactive. So reactive only takes objects, and then ref takes in all other data types. There's a slight difference, but you can think about it the same way as state, without now the getters, the setters for setting state. You just do it directly. Not structuring CG what CG state. It just works. Okay. All right. So now, with that in mind, I don't think there's anybody with a question after that point. Okay, so let's go into the style.css. I already have the styles for this application. So we just want to redo that application, but now use this view without the other implementation in it. So I'll go and get my CSS file and replace this styles.css. I will get it from my, because I already done all these things. So what I will do, simply put them side by side, and then I show you exactly how I was able to get to a fully functional application. Go into styles.css. Okay, nothing new here. I'm simply taking the CSS for my application. And I will paste it here. So that's all I've done. I've just taken the CSS. You can see Isha change styling. All right, we don't need all this code in, we don't need hello world. We do not need this hello world. Okay. We do not need all this nonsense happened down here. Remove it plus the hello world. Also don't need this scoped style. Simply have an empty template. So let's test it out. We have hello world. let's delete this in here. We no longer need this. Okay, so that's it. Our application is now down to the bare minimum. We now want to replicate what we had initially. Okay, so now this is all we need. We just have, this is the view file we have for the app the main app, the thing that is being pulled into main.ts, because remember, main.ts is creating the app and using app. And the app we are importing from app.view. That's why we have hello world. Okay. Okay, so now let's get the markup for our application. So I will go into app.view and I will not take anything else other than the markup. Is this markup. And I will simply paste it in this section. It will complain to high heaven because we are missing a lot of things. You can see it's already complaining, all these red marks. We don't have these things defined. We don't have user, we do not have, basically the user object does not exist. Funny thing is it's not actually supposed to crash. It has crashed, but you can't see anything here. But it's already complaining. So we need to get these values. We need to get these values. Now, setting state, that's the thing. How do we set state? We have looked at ref, but ref is different because ref, when you give ref an object, you cannot mutate it directly. So instead, we are going to use something called reactive. So if I go into the documentation for Vue and I go into reactivity fundamentals, you will see right here, should be under state. Let's see. Can't I see it? I want to show you that should be under state management because there's two APIs with Vue. So you can use refs. I'm going to look for that example for ref. I can't see it, so I think I'll just use reactive for now. But just keep in mind that ref is a bit different. When you use ref and you give it an object, if you want to manipulate the object, anytime you want to change the value of that object, you must always. So, for example, if we have ref here, if I had const and then user is equal to ref and then an object. Now I need to import ref. From Vue. So now what would happen is anytime I would want to change the value, so I have an object, I'm giving it an object as the state, and then I have first name, just a normal object, and I give it a value. Now, when I want to change the value, anytime I want to change the value, I'd have to do first name dot value every time, first name dot value, which is a bit of a pain. Now, when you're working with objects, if you want to have that flexibility whereby you just change the value directly, you now use reactive. Use the reactive instead of using ref. You can see right here, use reactive. So I can simply get reactive instead from Vue active, and then I can simply say I want active. Now we are setting the initial state. So you can see first name is now not red. We don't have a red value now here for first name. It's okay. We're simply passing in an object that has our values. We have just copy paste it. Don't feel like writing out the whole thing. So we'll simply go up. We'll simply take this object where it is. I will copy paste it here. Okay, so now this is how we are setting state. If you've used React, this is now setting initial state for our application. That is what we are doing. We are setting the initial state user, and then I'm giving it, I'm saying the value should be anything. Again, this is TypeScript. I'm saying the value should be anything. So I'm simply saying an object that has first name, last name, gender, email, and picture. And the values are set to nothing, just empty strings. I have set state, the initial state for the application. And then now I am binding, again, same thing we looked at when we started. I am binding my source attribute to user.picture. So user.picture is this object. I am also binding my alt to user.firstname, which is user.firstname. I am also binding my class to user.gender, which is here, and so forth and so forth. Now, we know that we need to make an API call for us to populate our application, right? We need to populate our application with something. So we need a method. We need to write a method that will fetch that information and populate our UI. Let's do that. Okay, I will simply copy paste my code. I will take this code and then I will simply paste it in here. So anytime you want to write your JS, you write it within the script. There we go. So now, if I walk you through the code, this is the exact function that we had in the other one. Haijabadilika, it's still the same. We are simply making the fetch request, and then we are awaiting the response. Then we are setting the value. So I'm changing the value of user.firstname equals to the results, the first index, then .name.first. So we are simply changing this value from empty strings to whatever value we get back from the API. Now, if you are using a React, you would need to use effect, right, to set the initial state when there's nothing. But with Vue, you don't have to do that. You simply call the function. And you can see we now have a working application again. I didn't have to do anything else. And now anytime I press on this button, we are changing values. We are changing value. We're changing. So it's simply calling, anytime we click on the button, it makes a new fetch request and changes the values. We make a new fetch request and it changes the values. And then if you want to pass in the data, you simply pass in user.firstname, which is coming back from the API, and then user.lastname, which is coming back from the API. And then email, and then user.email, and then the button, again, bind it to user.gender. So anytime you see the full colons, that is what you're doing. You're telling it, you should be able to accept JS. So whatever value we get here can be a JavaScript value. When you put the full colon before the name of the attribute, then it allows it to consume JavaScript. And then at click, we call the get user function. The get user function simply gets all the users. Now I am doing this because I want it to fetch the user on initial load. So when I do refresh my page, it gets the user and sets the initial state. If I do it again, it gets another user. I'm not handling things like on load and whatnot, but you can see it's very easy. If I now want to go through the users, I click one by one, one by one, one by one, and they're changing. Any questions? So this is what you call like a single file component, because we have everything here. We have our JavaScript, we have our HTML, and we can also include our CSS if we want to. But you can see here is the template. So the template is where you put your markup, and then the script is where you have your JavaScript. Any questions? So we've managed to bind, we are binding classes, that's the normal classes, to our JavaScript. That's what we are doing. The class, we are binding it to user.gender. So that user.gender, when user.gender comes back, if we have a gender of male, then we have different styles. Because if you look at our CSS, we have those two classes. We have a class for male and a class for female. So when we do change the value, so when gender changes to male, it also changes the class for the button to now take those styles from that class of male or female. Any questions? Any questions?
Can you repeat that part for classes again? How the user now changes.
Okay, so this section, so up to that point is this clear, the object that you're passing down? Is that okay?
Yes, yes.
Now, when we come here to the actual markup, anytime you put the full colon before any attribute, you're simply telling it, I want you to get a JavaScript value. You can actually write JS huku ndani sasa. That's what we are saying. Because user is an object. It's an object, right? It's this object here. I'm telling it user.firstname. So we can pass in like JS hapa ndani. So for the classes, what we are doing is, right? So when you don't have a user, there's no class that is being appended here. Sindio? But when we change the gender, so anytime we make a fetch request, the object will come back. So I will simply do a console log here of results. And then I will simply go into my application. You can see we've made the fetch request. We've gotten back an array. If I open the array, I can see I have gender. It's actually even the first one. I have gender right here, set to female. If you look at my classes, you can see I have a female class, and I also have a male class. So anytime, right, the response comes back with a female, I want you to change the class name of button. I want you to change the class name of button hapa, and I also want you to put a border, a pink border around the image. That's why hapa kwa the image I have a user.gender, because I'm getting the value of gender, then setting the border to pink anytime the response is female. So I change the border for image and I change the background color for the button to be pink, because I have a female class that is mapping to this value. So if I do another refresh, let's open it up. Again, it's still a female. If I now press on this, we have another object, another array here. So this was the first one. The second one now, you can see the border has changed, and so has the button. That's because the class that is being applied now, right, hapa kwa the gender is now male, and the male class is giving it a border color of steel blue and a background color of steel blue, because the gender has changed to male. I click on it again. It's now pink. Again, it's female. So we now pick the female class. Is it a bit clearer?
Yeah.
Okay. So now that's basically the basics of Vue. So we've already looked at like managing state. We've already looked at binding classes. So even if you had styles, if you wanted to bind a style, so normally you normally write styles this way. Sorry. But if you want to bind it, you simply have like that. Then this can now take in an object, colors, and then you give it a color. You can see it's now changed. This section for email is now green. So we are simply passing in an object now as the style. So anytime you have these full columns, it simply means we can now consume JavaScript, because now we're just simply passing in an object with a color green, because we do know that CSS has a color property. Okay, so now now let's look at rendering a list, right? So how do we render a list, for example? So I'm simply going to come into, so you can just treat this script as a normal JS file. So I simply want to come here and simply declare a new variable, array names is equal to an array. We have Mike, we have Jake, and we have Chris. Now, how do we loop over this and render it as a list on our page? So the way to do it in Vue is, so okay, first of all, let's have our UL. We have a list, and then we have our LIs. So we can say, Mike, this is how you would do it. Putting it. If we did not have Vue, so we have Jake and we have this. Now, if we want to use looping, or if you want to render a list, so if you're familiar with React, this is where you use map. But in Vue, you simply give it the element you want to repeat, which is the list, and then you tell it v-4 directive. Okay, then we tell it, right? You want to repeat name of, they call it array names. Like that, you can already see we have 3 of them. So it's already repeated itself 3 times. And then just like React, we do need a key. I can set the key value to array names.index of the name. This is not like this is not Vue, this is JavaScript. I'm simply looping over the array. So anytime we loop, I'm getting the index of whatever value I'm currently at and setting that as the key. So kama the first one is Jake, I'm setting Jake as the key because we do need the key. And then now if I want to pass in the values, did I say name or names? I want to pass in the values within the list. I simply say double mustache. It is, we have rendered the list. That's how you do list rendering in Vue. That's it. Now, what if we want to do something like conditional rendering? Okay, so let's look at that. What if we want to render things conditionally? So I can say, I can leave this here. So I can say I have paragraph here saying Vue is, and then I can have another one saying Vue is not awesome. I want this one to only render if a variable that I have called awesome is set to true. So we can go into my script tag right here and set a new variable called awesome. then we can use now ref, because ref is very good with the what are they called? Primitive graphics. Awesome. But set ref to false. Let's set it to false, first of all. So now I don't want to have both view is awesome and view is not awesome at the same time. I only want to render view is awesome when the awesome variable is set to true. I can come down here, within the key, I say view-if, and then I pass in awesome, and then this is simply a v-else. So now if I go into my code and I change this value to true, you can see now we have view is not awesome. That's because awesome is set to false. If I now change this value to true, now view is awesome. So now we are rendering conditionally. Anybody with a question? Any queries, anything I need to address? We've looked at state management at very basic. We've looked at list rendering. We've looked at conditional rendering. We have looked at binding classes. We have looked at like single file components. So what we have here is a single file component. That's what this is, because we have all our HTML, our CSS, and our JS within one file. And that's it. That is it for me in terms of the basics of Vue. Any comments, any questions? What were React? Are you about to throw a fit? Okay. I don't think there's anything else. I think I need to some time. Yes, Fred. Fred, I can see you raised your hand.
Yes. Yeah. Can you hear me, Ian?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. I just want to ask a general question.
Mm-hmm.
That is the differences that you think exist between maybe Vue and React and Angular. Like if somebody were at the point where they want to choose a framework, how would they know which framework to go with, and especially in terms of functionality, what each framework does, you know, the power, the strength of each framework, blah blah blah.
Okay, that's a good question. I think can you allow me to answer that once in Joseph's implementation, because Joseph is going to do a React one, the same application, but then now after that you guys can now do this for yourselves. Because there's normally a lot of people say Vue is better for beginners, so you guys look at React first and tell us after.
Aye.
Okay. Anybody else before I stop? Joseph, the floor is yours. I'll post it.
Okay.
I think Joseph will do the same.
Okay, let's see. We'll learn some React.
Joseph, before you begin, see Albert and mute me.
Oh, Albert. Yeah. It's muted.
No, it's muted now. Alright, so acha ni share screen. Sikupata time ya kufanya the sample app, but I think we can try to do it mbio if we have enough time. You can see the screen, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think I'll use also Vite or Vite. So I'll just run that command. Yeah, and create Vite. create a. In React, you can also use like the script tag, the way the first demonstration was done. But now, because of time, we want to be able to explore that. We'll just look at the most popular way of doing it. So yeah, you can come to React. So I definitely recommend doing it in TypeScript. But let's just go with JavaScript today. Maybe we can cover TypeScript some other time, because TypeScript we might not have enough time to like do it in TypeScript. So select JavaScript, and then we open it in VS Code. And we can use outside. Let me change this back to dark mode. Okay, so maybe we can begin by looking at the file structure, what you get when you create a basic React application. So with Vite, we get this source folder where all of our code will reside. And it's very common to see a components folder here, although Vite does not come with one by default, but it's very common to see a components folder here, because React is all about components. You have to think about all your UI stuff, all your UI elements in terms of components. So yeah, we'll create some components today just to demonstrate that. But apart from that, we have this app.css. It's the CSS file for app.js, and as you can see, we talked about this side effect import yesterday. This is an example of it. You just call your stuff there, and it will be bundled together with the CSS when you're doing the production build. Apart from that, you have a global styles file, and then we have the entry point to our application, which is main.jsx. So basically, in main.jsx, we are calling these two from React. This one is just the app component. This one, like from here, this one. Because like everything will go into app. So like app is the main component of our application. That's why we have it here. And then we have our global styles also here, because they apply to all the components. So as long as you have them here, all the components inside app will automatically get those styles from index.css. We also have our git ignore. This is the stuff that Git will not keep track of. We have our entry point. Like React is it's used to create single page applications. Basically, you only have one HTML file throughout the whole application. You'll only have this one HTML file with an entry point to the application, this root. So if we go back to main, maybe let's open both of them. Can also increase the size a bit. It's a bit slow. Yeah, I think that's a bit more visible. So basically, what happens is we have our entry point here, and we have our entry point, like the JavaScript file there also, the main.jsx. So if we go to that, you'll find that we have a piece of just plain JavaScript here. You can actually put it outside so that it looks more of a just plain JavaScript, selecting the root ID by this ID root. And then now, because that's our entry point to the HTML file, it's just passed to the React.create root. Create root method here. Yeah, so basically, maybe a bit of revision of what we did yesterday. These are default imports. They are default imports, these ones. But you can also destructure this one from React DOM if you don't want to import the whole of it. The way we did yesterday, you can do a bit of practice to see, like, how it's done. It's just the same in React. It's VS Code is a bit slow. And as I told you, if you press Control then spacebar, you'll see all the named exports from React. One of them is create root. Basically select that and remove this one. So that's a bit of a revision from yesterday. Yeah, so that's basically it here. And then you have also this thing called React.strict mode. When we console log stuff, you'll notice that it will be done twice. That is because of this React.strict mode. And it only applies during development. When you do a production build, this thing will be removed. And basically what it does, it prevents some sort of errors from creeping into your like application. So it's important to keep it there, and don't worry that your app is like doing two re-renders, like, because that only happens in development. Okay, so basically that's our entry points, the main and the index.html. Then we have our package.json, because this project is a node project. It's like we need to have a package.json to manage our packages. If you look at package.json, you'll find scripts. This is our dev script that we can run with npm run dev or yarn dev, or can also use pnpm, as you've seen Ian using. This one is for doing our production build. Yesterday I told you guys about module bundlers. So regardless of how many components we'll have here, whether they are 50 or 100 or whatever the number, as you can see, the entry point is just one JavaScript file. So this is the bundle that will be created when you run npm run build, to run vite build here. So what happens is that React will only have one HTML file as the entry point, and then depending on the actions of the users or whatever, it will just be swapping out the JavaScript, and bringing it into the view of the user, because it's just a single page. We don't have like 200 HTML files like the days of PHP. Okay, so and go back to package.json. We have two types of dependencies. These dependencies are basically npm modules. You can go to npm and look for React DOM, and these other ones. So basically, if you see a dependency, it's called if it's a main dependency, it means that in production, we'll still be using the React package and the React DOM package. But as for these dev dependencies, you only use them in development. For example, Vite, it's just a module bundler. We don't need it in production. So it's basically just a dev dependency. And same to these types, React types and React DOM types. They'll just help you, like in development, to have some like autocomplete and that stuff from React. But when you run your build, these ones will not go into your final bundle. So that's important to know. We also have a Vite config file. Yeah, so Vite is, as I told you, is a module bundle. You can configure it however you want. Like, this is just as simple. You can add additional plugins. You can do a lot of stuff here, depending on your use cases. Yeah, so that is all about setup. Let me look at what I was supposed to cover. Initial setup. That is all about initial setup. So basically, we have to now, this package.json is like a map of our dependencies, so that you can take this project and still run it on your machine. So basically, you just have to install the dependencies. In this case, because I'm using yarn, I can just run yarn like that, and it will install all those dependencies, and you'll see another folder coming up here called node modules. All node projects have that. If you run, like if you install the dependencies, you'll get that node modules folder. So basically, let's now install those dependencies and run the application. And then we can move on to JSX. I think that's the second thing to cover, unless someone has a question on this initial setup.
I have a comment, not the question. Oh, sorry, Nelson, go ahead first. Nelson.
Okay, so just a question based on the configuration package.json. So we have the dev dependencies, and then we have the dependencies. So that means even if I'm using npm create React app, that is the npx, not an npm. So when I run the npm run build, like EOSpedia, the application, while it eco-hosted online, it got the same if I created using Byte.
Basically, there are different module bundlers using different technologies. So about the speed, I'm not sure how they will compare, but according to Byte itself, it said like it's maybe X times faster than Webpack. But as you can see, Next.js is currently using Webpack, and it's equally fast. So it just depends on how you optimize it, because you can actually do a pretty like, because of this config file. If you go to Webpack, you'll also find webpack.config. You can change a lot of stuff here to try to optimize your build process. If you go to Next.js, I think there's a way that you can see there configure it, even for create React app. Let me I don't use create React app, but you can actually, if you want to look at the configuration of the bundler, you can still look at it. Let's see. Let me tell you what you're supposed to run. I think it's eject, npm run eject or something like that. If you go to your package JSON for create React app, you'll find something called eject. I think it's eject, something like that. Let's just have a quick look. But create React app uses Webpack under the hood. So I'm not sure where its package is at. You can go and check out and actually see it. You'll get a webpack.config and go and inspect it and see how much work they did to try and optimize Webpack, and you can do a lot of things. I think, have I answered you?
Yeah.
Okay. There was someone else.
Yeah, I was saying, if you guys have noticed, the only difference up to that point, setting up the application, the setup, everything is the same except the dependency. So if you check even the port they're running on, because Vite is the thing that is running it. So if you check the HTML file that Joseph currently has, can you open your HTML file? Entry file, yeah. You can see it's exactly the same, other than for the title, which is Vite plus React. Mine was Vite plus Vue. If the div with the root is the same, the div with the root is the same, and the other difference is the script. Mine was not JSX. It was not. Mine was ES6 because I was using TypeScript. And then the other difference now comes into the dependencies. Mine was Vue, Yak and React. The dev dependencies are also different, but the commands are also very similar. Even the application, they look very similar. And then obviously now the setup for the application. You can see. So mine had Vite, but mine Apoca Vite.js, mine was not a plugin for React. It was a plugin for Vue. Same with the type. Mine was for Vue, not for React. So they're very similar. They look very similar. Even the entry file, right, is targeting your ES6 file. Can you look at your ES6 file? Your entry file for your, yeah, you can see. I was also targeting an ID of root, then putting my app there. Same thing he's doing. He's getting create root, getting the element with root, then rendering it. And what is he rendering? The app on line 3, which is being imported from app. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a nice addition from Ian. Basically, they're node projects created using npm, and now that they share Vite as a common like bundler, they have very many similarities. So probably for Vue, you'll find the plugin here as maybe Vue, because as you can see, we have one difference there where you'll import the plugin Vue instead of plugin React. Yeah, so that's a nice addition from Ian. So let's talk about JSX. As you saw in Vue, like the code is closer to what you'd write in maybe just vanilla JavaScript. But in React, the components are made up of functions. Before, maybe we can remove that one. Before React 16, I think 0.3 or 0.8, we had OOP in React, whereby you instead of creating these functions, you would create a class now to represent your components. But now after that React 18, now we have functions as components. So that's, I think, one of the difference between React and JSX. And with React, we have a function. Basically, the app is a function here. That, let's first just make it simpler. You don't even need that one. And you can even do it from scratch. So it's basically just a JavaScript function, but according to convention, you should give it an uppercase name like that. So if you're into maybe arrow functions, you can also use arrow functions. And then now what you return from the function is what will be rendered to to the user interface. So that's where JSX comes in. JSX is basically the syntax that you use to create now your user interface, and it's pretty similar to what you would write in HTML. So what we have here, this is already JSX, and as you can see, there's no difference between it and just a vanilla HTML. Maybe we can say hello world like that. This is how you'd like write a div in HTML like that. So basically, JSX is just HTML now, but you can embed JavaScript inside your HTML. Or you have to export it. As I told you before, if you don't export the module, it will not be accessible outside itself. So you have to export it down here. Export default app. Then after doing that, now we should get our hello world on the screen, I believe. Like that. So you can see this is already JSX. If you go and inspect it, you'll see that it's now been transformed into actually HTML. The difference between JSX and plain HTML is that you can embed JavaScript and expression inside it very easily. For example, if you say 1 + 1, this is a JavaScript expression. Let me go and remove these styles so that you can see properly. Maybe increase this to 26. Gen. Okay, I can just write inline styles. So basically, as you can see, we are getting number 2 here. And JSX, it has most of the, like probably all the attributes that you will need, you will maybe want to write inside a HTML like element. The example is this style tag. If you want to write inline styles, it's almost similar to how you write it in HTML. But now the difference is that you have to use this syntax. Basically, the first curly brackets, we are opening the expression bit, and then we can nest our styles inside that, the second one. For example, if I want to do padding like this, I can just do 20 rem. That's too big. 10. And you can see it's getting the padding and moving. Okay, so in JSX, what you have to remember is this syntax. If you want to nest an expression, you have to do that. That's this one, and then nest whatever code you want to nest there. Another thing to note about JSX is that you can only have one parent element. Okay, let's see what that is about. For example, if you wanted to have 2 divs like that, if we save, it should be okay like that. It's actually undone it, but let's just copy paste it like this. Automatically you get errors. If you hover on that, you can actually be using your development environment to get these errors and know how to solve them. JSX expression must have one parent element. So how can we solve that? You can either do this. These are called React fragments. They're basically empty React. They're like empty tags, and you'll meet them a lot if you do React development. So you can do this, and you see the error has gone away. Or you can add another parent element to cover your stuff. So if you have multiple lines in JSX, they have to be inside like one parent element. And if you don't want to pollute your HTML, you can just use a React fragment. You might also find it written like this. That fragment, like that. So it's basically the same thing. If you use this one, or if you use this one, they're the same thing. What else can I talk about in JSX? JSX is very similar to HTML in that, but now we don't do imperative programming in React. We do declarative programming. Mostly, you won't be creating event listeners, for example. You'll be using the bindings that React provides for you to interact with the synthetic event, like maybe clicks and all that, click, drag, tap, all that. So if you want to do like on click, maybe you want to listen out for a click event, this is the syntax that you'll use. Maybe you can, and then you have to pass in a function. And as you can see, you can also take the event object there. Maybe you can just console log the event. So this event object, let's go to the console. On click, okay, where is that number 2? I click it. Let's remove the padding. As you can see, after clicking it, we are getting an event here, an object. But this event is not basically like the one that you'd get in when you're using plain vanilla JavaScript, because React provides something called a synthetic event. It's like a wrapper around the browser's native event object. Yeah. So this is how you do click, if you want to handle a click event. Okay, what was the next thing? State, yeah, let's talk about state. As you saw in Vue, unless there's someone who has a question on JSX, questions are always important. Okay, let's continue. So in React, as you can see here, I just have a physical value. This is not how you handle state. State is basically the data that is maintained within your application. Maybe user credentials, maybe a products array that displays all your products, something like that. Any data, a piece of data in your application, that is basically a piece of state. If you want to toggle dark mode from light to whichever, you can use a piece of state to interact with that. So let's see what state is all about. React provides an import. Actually, there's this concept called hooks. You'll hear about hooks. What is a hook? Hooks. We hear about hooks very often when you're doing React development. So, as I said, before functional programming was a thing, there used to be class-based components whereby you are writing React using OP. So, when functional components were introduced to the library, you could not be able to access state. State could only be done using class-based components. So what the React team did was just now take that functionality from those classes and then create hooks from them. Basically, you are hooking into the functionality that is in class components. That's why they were given this name called hook. You're simply hooking into functionality that was previously unavailable in functional components. The most important hooks that you have to know in React, there are many, but some of them might not be relevant to you, maybe as just ordinary developer. Some are relevant when someone is doing a library or something like that. So let's look at the key hooks that you have to know as a React developer. You have to know these ones, like inside out and how they work. The first one is use state. This one hooks into state. And as we said, state is basically any data that your application maintains. The next one is use effect. What does use effect work? How does it work? How do we use it? Use effect is basically used to perform side effects in React. So what are side effects? What is a side effect? Basically something that you're kind of reaching outside React to do something outside the context of React. So React is a bit paranoid. It doesn't want you it wants to maintain control at all times. So if you want to do any effect, you have to use a use effect. An example, what is an example of an effect? Fetching data from whichever source. It might be a remote server, it might be whatever, but React doesn't know about that remote server. So it just needs you to put that effect inside a use effect. Yeah, what is another example of an effect? If you want to access, maybe if you want to use, what are they called? Event listeners. Using native event listeners. Maybe you want to do something when the window loads. You cannot just come here and say const, maybe div is equals to document.what, and then you start doing the imperative approach. Remember, React is declarative programming. Declarative, imperative versus declarative. Imperative, you have to tell the computer what it has to do. But declarative, you haven't seen me doing document.create element anywhere. I'm just giving React the piece of UI that I want to be displayed, and I'm telling React to just figure it out. You should know how you're going to create these elements and all that, how to create the event listeners and all that. I don't care about like how React will do it. That is one of the difference between imperative and declarative programming. You just simply declare what you want, and whichever library or whichever thing you're using just figures it out. Yeah, so these are examples of side effects. Another common side effect, and you'll find this one asked in interviews: timeouts. Set timeout. Set interval. Set immediate. All of this, if you want to create any logic, maybe you're trying to create a clock or something, or maybe a stopwatch. That's an effect. You have to put it inside use effect. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Okay, the next one that is equally important for you to know is context. Use context. Although context is a bit different, but we have this so-called use context that enables you to consume some context. As you heard, when you started the session, Albert was asking about state management. What are you supposed to pick depending on the size of your application? So basically, if you're using the context API, you have to use the use context when you're trying to access maybe the shared state that you want to share between components. I didn't want to like go at any, like I want to make it as simple as possible, because basically it's like an introduction class. Another hook that you'll find useful is called use reducer. These are all built-in hooks. So these ones are sisters. Use state, and let's them put them next to each other. Use state and use reducers are sisters. Use state, you should use it for simple state logic. Hooks, let's just say used to manage simple state logic. That's what use state is used for. Now use reducer, if you have some complicated state, maybe you're working with a number of maybe objects or something, you can now go and utilize these use reducers used to manage complex state. And basically use reducer has syntax that is very, very similar to what Redux does, because you'll find the concept of actions and types here in use reducer, just the way you do it in Redux. You'll find the concepts of payloads, actions, and types, and reducers here. Reducers, payloads, and all that. Let's wrap that like that. So yeah, these two are sisters. They perform the same function. This one is used for performing side effects, basically something that React is unaware of. And then use context, it's used to enables you to consume some context, and let's just say to avoid prop drilling, because you might find an interviewer asking you, why should you use context in a React application? Basically, is to avoid prop drilling. And we'll see what this big word is all about next. Actually, Ian, should we just continue, because I see like time has already gone? Or what do you think?
We can continue. I think, are you guys okay continuing? I think we can continue. I don't think there's an issue.
Okay, let's continue then. So let me see which other hook. Yeah, there are a couple of other hooks, but I'd say these ones are the most important for you to know. And then hooks, they should not just be used like maybe just when you're fetching data and I want to store my product somewhere. That's when I come and use like a hook. you can compose these hooks, compose the hooks to create custom hooks. There's something called custom hooks, whereby you can compose different types of hooks together and then now create your own custom hooks. Composition of one or more React hook to achieve desired functionality. Yeah, so basically that's a quick crash course about hooks, and maybe we'll use maybe 2 of these hooks or 3. So now let's dive into state and what state is all about. So if you want, as I said, state is just used to maintain like data that your application consumes. And this is the syntax. This is just JavaScript. This is object restructuring, and then you call use state on the other side. And hooks must be nested within a component. I cannot use state outside here. It has to be inside a component like that. So maybe Ian, you can send me that API thing. Or maybe you can just start it simple with count. So the convention again here with state, you'll destructure 2 things from this array. So basically this array is a tuple, a tuple. If you are familiar with TypeScript, you'll get this concept of tuples. Basically an array with a fixed length. If you have an array that always has 2 elements inside it, it's a tuple. Always has 3, like it cannot exceed above that. That's what a tuple is. Set count. So this is just basically a convention. When you're doing array destructuring, you can name these things whichever thing you want. But now there's a convention. The first one takes the name of the data itself, and then the setter function. You put the set, then what you had here before, and then camel case it. For example, now if you had products, it has something like this: product, then set products, like so, like that. And then you also have to specify the default, like what will this state start with. So in the case of our count, we want it to start at 0. You can just add your 0 there, like that. And then, as I told you, you can just nest JavaScript like expressions inside JSX. Let's scroll like that. Maybe let's not use a fragment, a div. Then you can just say count down there. And then we should see our 0 inside our, when it finishes loading, we should see our 0 inside our application. Where is the 0? Error is I haven't imported this use state. So basically, use state is we have different ways of importing it. As I told you, you just have to figure out your style and then stick to it. You can use like this use state because it's a named export. You can import it as a named import. Use state like that. Another alternative that you'll see is the namespace one that I told you guys about yesterday. Like that. You'll also see this pattern. Basically, as I told you yesterday, we are namespacing all the named exports from React. So whatever was a named export from React will be inside the keyword that you specify here. So I can just come here and say React.useState. React. And if you go and if you just do React dot, you'll see all these are all the named exports from React, because you've namespaced them into this thing called React, but you can name it anything. This one can be anything. But basically, it's said that you should use like descriptive names. You see, but it will still work like that. You still get all the named exports from that namespace. But personally, I prefer this syntax because I don't like objects and stuff. I like destructuring my what I want to use when possible. So assuming products was an array, you can initialize it with anything, with null, with undefined, with an empty array. So assuming this one was an array. Is that like a question? Okay, let's continue. I want to move this thing a bit. Now there's another difference when you're writing styles in JSX. Because as you know, this would not be a valid JavaScript thing. So you have to camel case always. All your stuff has to be in camel case. In this case, padding inline like that. Just want to move it a bit. And then, yeah, you put it then in here as a string. Block. So, yeah. As you can see, we are getting 0 here. Margin left will be margin left like that. I want you to move it a bit inside. Yeah, so basically, this is how you write styles. You have to do the camel casing on the styles themselves. Yeah, I think you guys can see. So when you want to change state, that's why you use this setter function. It's called a state setting function or a setter function. So in this case, I want 2 buttons to increment and decrement this 0. Let's just do that really fast. Oh, let's put our count here. So basically, you can just have 2 buttons. It has refused. Let's do it the old-fashioned way, like that. Maybe plus and minus. Like that. Maybe you can just put them here. And put them in a new line. Like that. So now you can come and put an event listener on our buttons. There are 2 ways of doing it. You can put it outside like that. I always prefer this approach. You can put it outside like that. So when we click on increment, like this plus, just want to set count to count plus 1. Then you can do the same for decrement. Count minus 1 like that. And then now you basically just put your own clicks there under increment. So like you see, it's not imperative. You don't do a button dot add event listener, click, then run like a callback function, and that event has been received. This one is we basically just doing it in a declarative way. as you can see, if I click the plus, it will add. If I click the minus, it will subtract. So assuming I had now, I wanted now to take the functionality of the count. I think we can just do the basics learned today, and then we can do that demo tomorrow. Okay, so assuming we need like something to hold our counter. Now that's where components come in. Go to your components folder, create that component.jsx. Again, it's just a function, but there's a handy tool. It's called something, I forget the name, that you can use to, but I'll figure it, I'll find that name and give it to you guys. That extension, you just write RAFCE, React Functional Component, React Arrow Functional Component. That is a default export. If I press enter, you get my component immediately. So basically, you can come here. Now we are heading now into the concept of props. You can just put our counter there. And as you can see right now, our counter is just returning a div with this counter thing there. So basically, you can come in here. I want the count to live inside this external component. So basically now that's where props come in. Props, that's how you share data between components in React. Props is basically properties. That's how you share properties between one component and the other. So we can just come in here and say count is equals to count. You just basically have to provide the name of the prop and then provide the value from your state here. So basically, this is the name of the prop, and then this is the name of our state. Now, we know that we are passing a prop into this component. By default, this component has something called the prop parameter here. If you want to access props passed into one component from another component, in this case, you are passing props from app to counter. And remember that props can only be one unidirectional. Props are unidirectional. Let's write some notes. One key is that it is unidirectional. It basically flows in one direction. If, in this case, app is our parent, and then counter is our child component. So props can only be passed from app to counter. Like it's unidirectional and it flows downwards from parents to children to grandchildren to great-grandchildren and so on and so forth. Another thing, props is read only. You cannot go and just delete props unless you go and maybe create a copy of it and do whichever thing you want to do to it later on. And it can be very many simple different things. It can be just a simple variable, like they can be primitives or objects. And in this case, you know that functions are also objects. So functions and arrays and everything is included here. And classes and everything, you can just pass them as props. So to access the props, you come here. As we know, if you want to do the JavaScript, you have to open your expressions like that. And then props dot the name that you gave that prop. So if we were using TypeScript, we will get autocomplete here with that count name. But now in this case, we're just using plain old JavaScript. And the convention is to see it as props like that. So we've passed down props from a high app component, which is our app here, downwards. So that's now where Albert's question comes in. Assuming you have very many nested components, it will become pretty tiresome, because you'll find that one component will just be passing the props down without even using it. So that's how, now that's where you come in and use the context API. Okay. Basically, now let's test this thing out. As you can see, it's still incrementing, it's still decrementing. So basically, just passing down props is just sharing data between different components. In this case, app is what owns the count variable. That's one use of state. For example, if I had a toggle for, let's see what was the next one in line. Does anyone have a question in regard to props and state up to there? I assume there's no question, so we'll continue. The next thing was classes and styles. I've already talked about a style. This is how you do the style. But classes, as you know, JSX is, you're basically still in JavaScript land, and class is it's a keyword in JavaScript. Yeah, you cannot use it here, so that's why you find React uses something called class name. It's basically just class, but now because class is it's a keyword that JavaScript uses, you have to use it as now class name, and then you can pass in your classes as usual, maybe count and whichever, and still you can pass them dynamically. Like as long as you're in JSX land, you can embed JavaScript expressions. For example, what can we do? You can do some conditional. I didn't want to use classes. Let's just use a style this time. And now see how maybe you can have conditional logic, like logic that only fires when a certain condition has met. Maybe let's say we want to add a border. Add a border here, like, but it's not like added. Like we want it to be added according to a certain condition. This basically come here. Maybe you can use count. Count is equals to 10. So you can in React land you can basically use ternaries to do your conditional logic. Okay. Now we want the border maybe 2 pixels. Solid red. Otherwise, to 1 pixel solid green. Let's make it red to make it more dramatic. You can remove this thing to have a better view of that conditional logic. Things refresh. A bit of margin to the left, like that. Okay. What is? And we have an error.
I think the border is expecting a string.
The border. Let's see. But without this, it was working. Let's just remove it. Like that. So sometimes you can just, so yeah, basically when we reach the condition here is that if count is equals to 10, it will turn to red. Otherwise, by default, it will be green. So let's see. See? And then if it's not 10, it goes back to green. Maybe let's make it a bit more dramatic. Yeah. So if it's not 10, that's now conditional logic, and you can, as you can see, it's happening at that point where that condition is met. So this is how you do, the conditional rendering in React. You can use ternaries, or you can maybe even use like if else and such stuff. What else can we talk about? Classes and style, conditional rendering. We've also talked about conditional rendering. We've talked about passing props. The only remaining thing is list rendering. I think we can do list rendering as the final thing. Really fast. It will take just a few minutes. Let me grab my charge. So lists, they're called lists in most programming languages, but in JavaScript we can also call them arrays. Or the alias for them is arrays. So so let's see how that works. Maybe you can remove that. Or just let's create another app. So that we have a cleaner code. Let's just assume you're starting from that point. So it's working. If you want to fetch data from an external API, you have to use state, because where will you store your data? There are many like alternatives to data fetching in React using various different libraries. But now, because we are just looking at the basics, we'll basically just use inbuilt tools to do the data fetching. As I told you, use state like that. So the convention is, maybe you are fetching products. We call it products, and then the setter will be set products. And VS Code actually also has a snippet for use effect. You could just use that. Then you go to this one. Then you just type product. You press tab, and then now you put your default like that. Okay, it's a bit faster. So now we have the piece of state that will hold our products. Then now, as I told you, doing a network request is a side effect. Whenever you have a side effect, you have to use effect. You also have a snippet for use effect. This one is the use effect. It's basically the most common way of seeing it is it's like this, but it also returns a cleanup function. It also returns a cleanup function. So let's look at the syntax of the use effect. So basically, it takes a callback function and a dependency array. That is what this is. So if we want, depending on what we want our app to behave, we can specify dependencies here. For example, if we want maybe something to only run on mount when the app component is mounted onto the DOM, we'll leave this dependency array empty. So in our case, we'll leave it empty because we only want to do the fetch when the component loads. But for example, if we were doing a timeout, if we're creating a timeout, you have to call the timer. Let's just do it fast. Set timeout. maybe 1,000, like that. So if you don't do something here, clear timeout. But now this is one of the use cases of this cleanup function, the return function of the use effect. In the case of timeouts, intervals, if you don't run this function basically runs when your component unmounts. When it mounts, it will run your timer. And then when it unmounts, it will run the cleanup to make sure you destroy that timer when the component is unmounted. If you don't do this, you'll get something called a memory leak, and you'll see very weird behavior. For example, if you're doing a timer or something, it might be counting just endlessly. You might close the app and open and find it's continuing to count because you didn't remove that timer when you unmounted your component. You can also use it, for example, if you're doing WebSockets, if you're creating a chat application, a real-time chat application using sockets, maybe socket.io. You'll find that you'll subscribe using a use effect, and then when you destroy the component, you'll run an unsubscribe function to make sure that you close the connection when you unmount your component. So this is also a very popular syntax that you'll see. Yeah, so we want to do a side effect, which is effects to API. I think it will provide as an array. Sorry, Ian, I'm for getting carried away kidogo.
You love React, I think you're also learning a lot.
Okay, let's just now sum it up because time is not on our side. So basically, you have to define your function, your fetch function, and this is a perfect use for creating a custom hook. You basically have a custom hook called use fetch. If you had time, we'd look at that. But anyway, let's now for this function, it's async. That's it. I want to use async await. Then let's try to use the best practices to catch errors because we don't own this server. Constraints equals to wait. Let's just use the native fetch. Pass in our API route, and then const products because of wait res JSON. And then you can return products there. So basically, this function doesn't need to be here. You can even create a utils folder somewhere and just call it, bring it in here just to use it. So we have to call it fetch products. As you know, it will return a promise. So you can still chain our thens. You can do it like this. You have two ways of doing it. If you want to, you can receive the data and then now use the set products here. Then we are setting the data like that. If you come here, log products. So basically, if you want to store any particular piece of data from anywhere, maybe from a server or just local data within your application, you have to use usestate. Let's see, we have some errors. Product is not defined. Oh, it's a product, not products. Its effect is not defined. This is why you have to code with your console open, unless otherwise you won't be able to know what's happening. You might think something is broken and actually it's not. So yeah, basically that's it. As you can see, I told you about the use strict. That's why it's running twice. again, it's running twice. If you go, is it? Just remove it like that. You see the difference now. It runs once, as you can see. Okay. Why are we not receiving our data back? Okay, yeah. So you can also catch the errors and then log them to the console. So this is one of the most common uses of use effect. And as you can see, we're only running it on mount. Remember that if you have nothing inside the dependency array, it will only run on mount just once when the component mounts. But assuming maybe we had count. Do you still have the count up there? Yeah, assuming we had this variable count and you had a condition, maybe when the count reaches a certain amount of number, you want to do the refetch, you basically just add that variable here. As for example, maybe the products, you can just add it inside the dependency array. But now we just want it to run on mount just once. We've gotten our list back. So let's just look at how the lists are rendered into the screen, and then we'll be done. So basically, if you want to write the React, again, you have to open your curly brackets like that. Now, this product, this thing called products here, is what we set here. It's this one. Actually, it's supposed to be products. But let's just use product like that. This one is what we are getting back here. So yeah, in React we use the map. This is basically a more or less JavaScript. Map is JavaScript. Let's just do some best practices here. Products.map. Then for each product, we want to return a div like that. Maybe a more appropriate tag will be an article. Maybe we can just trimify that output and see what we get back. Because you cannot like put inside here something like maybe an object cannot be rendered onto this directly into the screen. Are we getting errors? It's not defined. Set product is not defined. So it's here. As I told you, here we have two ways of doing it. You can take the data and set it like this, or you can just call set products here like that. I think that's a cleaner way of doing it. Set products. Where is it? These things hanging. Network error. I'm attempting to refetch resource. I'm getting a network error, but it's also just worked. It's a bit jumbled up and too big. Maybe let's just log it to the console. So yeah, but if you want to log it to the console, we have to change our return here. This is called an implicit return. So we don't have the return keyword. But if you want to log it, we might need these things here. So the log product. And then now you can return your article like that. Let's go and see the shape. You're getting a complaint here. Yeah, cool. Yeah, so the product is an object with the title. If you want to access title, and put a paragraph. Come on, Emmet does not want to operate today. Then just do product, because it's an object, title like that. And then we have to reduce this font size. It's too big. It's a bit better. So as you can see, we are getting all our product titles on the screen. I think there's also an image. So I want to, like, we saw how it's done in Vue. Like you see the bindings. You saw the bindings that Ian used. Product dot title. Then can go now to the console. Let's first do it like this so that we look at the shape of the data. Okay, where is the image? Yeah, we have an image here. Product dot image. I think my network is a bit slow, but let's see whether it will work. But basically, this is what you do. And then if you don't like me, if you don't like doing this dot syntax, you can just destructure it here. Title image. Then now down here, you don't have to do the dots like that. My server is basically a bit slow. It's taking a very long time. Yeah, now network error, getting a network error. But basically, this is what you do. So you can access all the other, like, yeah, whatever comes back as product, and then just nest them inside here. And now come and undo your styling. I think the error is here. Yeah, so this is how you do list rendering in React. And as you can see, can you guys still hear me? Someone was calling me. Yeah, and as you can see, we're getting back on. My internet is super slow. That's why some of them don't have images yet. But basically, this is how you do it. So the only thing that is left is to just add in your styles. But if you're not console logging, you can do that implicit return that I was talking about, just to have a fewer returns. You see, this is a bit confusing. A return, another return. You can just simply avoid this one if you're not doing any other additional thing inside, like that expression. You can just do the implicit return like this. Ian, I think maybe you can just stop there. You've gone long enough.
Yeah, very well done again. Very, very detailed. I think hata mimi sasa I will now build my Netflix clone sasa.
Yeah, this is React, man. The joy of React.
React is very interesting. Hata mimi kidogo tumebaki tu kidogo tu nisaliti view. Hivi kidogo tu, just a bit.
Unaweza fanya zote maze.
Naweza fanya zote, but obviously I think React makes you feel more smart. I do not know why. I don't know kama it's the composing of functions, because like half of the things that umefanya, like you can do them in a more I don't know how to put it, like simpler in terms of kama wewe ni beginner, you can do them na Vue. But there's something with React that once you get into the ecosystem and you really understand it, you feel like kuandika code yenye sio functional programming is beneath you.
And so the benefit again is that now you can also use these hooks to just create your own hooks. It becomes even cleaner.
That's you pia compose the way that you pass props, and now using higher order functions like map. Gonna a lot of so it's gonna a lot of benefits, but that was very well done. Thank you very much. Now,
so unless there's a next question,
that was very detailed.
I definitely knew that we wouldn't be able to do that other thing, but at least people have a solid understanding of this.
Yeah. Anybody, like you guys, I hope you guys have been able to see like how the two frameworks are similar but also very different in terms of implementation. Vue does not use JSX, though it supports JSX. You can use JSX, but not out of the box. You have to do some configuration. But you can see like there's a lot of power with both frameworks. So they're both very nice. So now with that in mind, you can go and play around with React, you can play around with Vue, but you can see the basics beneath both of them is very similar. Zinafanana sana. Anybody with a question? Anyone? No one. Okay. So I'll push I'll push my code to GitHub, and I think Joseph, you can do the same. Alafu you guys can go through the code. But Joseph has,
should I send it to you? Or I just push it to my GitHub.
Hit your GitHub.
Okay.
And then I will just get it. Yeah. When I'm to group. Yeah, to group to the repo.
Yeah, I'll tidy the thing up, come up products, and then just a few lines of CSS, and then just send it in.
So, okay.
Yeah.
So I guess we can end for today. For the guys wenye wamebaki mpaka saa hii, you guys are definitely clearly pia nyinyi mnapenda React. Or you love learning. But I hope mmelearn kitu. I hope those frameworks are not as scary now that we have looked at two of them. Actually, my plan was we look at one that none of us has done. Alafu tuone kama we can figure it out based on those two, but we didn't have enough time. So probably we'll try that just before we start the React mentorship. But I will see, we will resume on Monday. You guys enjoy the rest of your weekend. Bye.
Bye.
Ian.
Or Evans, we'll do yours on Monday.
Oh, so I'll be ready for Monday. Okay.
I'll be ready for Monday.
So.
Okay.